Welcome to Bosses with Baggage. I'm Sherry Sutton, your host and business growth guide. Around here, we believe that failures are our superpowers. So in this podcast, we'll explore the many ways that setbacks can mold, shape, and change your life and your business and ensure that you come out of the fire better than before. Through interviews with business leaders and discussions of my own personal struggles, we'll unlock the secrets to turning setbacks and low moments into opportunities to thrive. From approaching your business with a servant's heart to getting comfortable with being the face of your brand, each episode will be a safe, judgment-free zone to reframe the concept of failure with honesty, empathy, grace, and a whole lot of laughter. So are you ready? Let's go. Namaste, my friends. My name is Sherry Sutton. I am your marketing mentor and the host of Bosses with Baggage. I am here with my friend Matt. Say hello.
Hey, Sherry. Thanks so much for having me on the show today. Great to see you again.
Good to see you. And the reason why we're seeing each other again is because I was actually a guest on Matt's podcast called Beyond Recovery. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. And that was, 6 months ago, maybe. Could it have been a year? No.
Not quite a year. I think it was the beginning of this year. Which, man, that went by quick, didn't it? It doesn't seem that long ago. But yeah, when you mentioned, I was like, 6 months. Yeah, no, that tracks. It's about 6 months ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us where in the world you're joining us from and a little bit about what you do. And then this is Bosses with Baggage. So we like to get right into the baggage. So start telling us a little bit about your background, kind of what your dark night of the soul looked like, and we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks again for having me on. So I'm calling in from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. So that's like a northern Alberta town. So, 8 months of winter. We always joke it's 8 months of winter and then 4 months of construction. So right now we're in construction season. So I've been here about 20 years. I'm from Prince George, British Columbia, which is like a smaller version of Edmonton in the province to my west. So that's a little bit of part of my story. I'll get into it. I am currently doing sober coaching, recovery coaching, life coaching. I've been doing that full time for about a year and a half now. I had been doing a retail job working a grocery chain started as a part-time closing kid at 16 years old and literally worked as my one and only job for 22 and a half years, climbed the corporate ranks, so to speak, was an assistant store manager by the time I left, which that sort of ties into my dark night of the soul. So there's basically two parts of my story that I'll get into here. The career pivot, why I did it, and my personal recovery story. So and wait,
before you do that.
Yes.
If anybody's watching this, there's a guest that's also on this podcast, and they need to be introduced. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Absolutely. So this is Trout, and
Trout.
Yeah, she just turned 16, so she's been a buddy of mine for quite some time. She seems to know when the camera's on or when I'm recording something. She's been on so many different podcasts over the years. Sneaks into my audio when I'm recording like guitar and singing and such. You'll hear a little in the background, a little backing vocals action. So yes, Trout has joined us. Thanks for, I wasn't sure if she was still in the camera shot or not there. So yes, she's currently on my lap purring. So I guess she's also happy to be here.
Excellent. And again, Bosses with Baggage, we like to get right to the baggage, except when there's cute pets.
Yeah, there's the one caveat. If there's a cute animal involved, we're going to pause that. Yeah.
Totally. Okay, so now we can go to the baggage. So tell us a little bit about your background, your dark night of the soul.
Yeah. So going from cute animal to dark night of the soul, that's a natural segue, right? So yeah, I've definitely, I started drinking and getting into like heavy marijuana usage at 16. And I'd put it off for a while because I'd known growing up on both sides of my family, but specifically my dad was a big drinker. I found out a few years into my teenage years that he was a daily marijuana smoker as well. So, and I just knew something about, the warnings, right? Like you got to watch this stuff, right? And so I was a little bit hesitant going in, but I was a really shy kid. And I'll tell you, as soon as I got that, those first couple drinks in me, I was like, oh, perfect. I don't have to be shy anymore. It was one of those deals. So that was my reason for doing it. It worked until it didn't, sort of thing. Right. And, getting into music, by the time I was 15, I went from like an athlete, I was in all the sports growing up and such. And then I got into music and marijuana. So as soon as I got into like, music for me is like, I started reading about like Led Zeppelin, and, 15-year-old me was like, this sounds really cool, like destroying hotel rooms and drinking and playing loud music. So that really appealed to me. And then, so that was basically after that, I'm like, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. Right. So that was my idea. I was going to be a musician. I mean, I still am, but I wanted to be like a famous musician. Right. So drinking started making decisions for me in a lot of ways. I moved out to Alberta from BC, where legal drinking age is 18. So that was one of the reasons I moved. I'm like, oh, sweet, I can start playing in bars with my band. Curiously, musician is like one of the only jobs they encourage you to drink on the job. You know what I mean? Which I was like, oh, perfect. You're the entertainment. You're getting paid that night. But when you show up, they give you like 6 beers each. You know what I mean? Like, here's some drink tickets. I'm like, sounds good. So, fast forward like through my 20s, I was daily drinker. That's when it started. I'd say like about 2021, I started, drinking daily. And by the time I was 27, it had really ramped up to the point I gave myself acute pancreatitis. So I went to the hospital, incredibly painful, incredibly frightening. I thought I was going to die. I had no idea what was going on. Still in a little bit of denial. Like, I told my parents I was in the hospital, but I made up some BS about like I was mixing some supplements, like the vitamin D supplement that must have done it. You know what I mean? Nonsense.
Food poisoning, Mom. Food poisoning.
Right, exactly.
She.
Yeah, right. I took too much of it. Put it under my tongue. I shouldn't have. All this like nonsense. And yeah, I was in the hospital for 3 days, and the whole time doing that, like, please, if I get out of this, I'll never drink again. And as I'm walking back from the hospital, which is the university grounds of Edmonton, so you can imagine lots of liquor stores in and around that area. Well, just anywhere in Alberta generally, but specifically in that region, there's like 3 liquor stores on my like 7 to 10 minute walk home. It was totally like the Goldilocks thing. Like, I walked by the first one, I was like, alcohol, I'm so done with you, right? And then the second liquor store comes, and then there's like this voice in my head that starts going, wow, that was whiskey that did that to you. Like, beer, if you started drinking beer, like, nobody ever has problems with beer. It's 5%. Nobody has problems like with beer. I'm like, yeah, that sounds actually kind of logical. And then by the third liquor store, which is close to my house, I grabbed a 6-pack of beer, and I was drinking again that night. So from praying to like, I've learned my lesson, I'll never touch another drop, to on my walk home, I grabbed a 6-pack of beer. So then I was a beer guy, for until I'd say my 30s. And that's when I really hit a rock bottom. It was just like, the fairly long-term relationship I'd been in ended, we'll just say, not very well. We ended up getting back together, and she's my current wife now. But we had definitely a pretty bad falling out, and by that time my drinking had just ramped up. Meanwhile, curiously enough, my band had just received a $10,000 grant to record a professional album. I was getting promoted at work. So there's this confusing thing, and I'm sure that you're going to get a lot of this on your show here. Like high performing otherwise. Trout, we're just going to move you there, big girl. Bye, Trout. So high performing otherwise, and then as I'm like leveling up on all this other stuff, my drinking and like my spirit essentially is like going into this descent of like madness, essentially, right? And so that's finally when I just put my hand up, and I'm like, I can't fake this. I can't do this anymore. I'm like drinking before I go to work. I'm sometimes bringing beers to work and like out to my car. I'm drinking on my breaks, just crossing every line imaginable, right? And I'd got a really bad concussion from I fell down some stairs. I was smoking cigarettes, but I hadn't smoked in a while. And, you get that huge head rush when you don't smoke for a while. And I was like, whoa, I got to go downstairs, like just chill for a bit. And yeah, I went downstairs like head first, and like I got a bit of a scar there still. I busted my head open, blood everywhere. And, I had to go to the hospital for that. And I had a really bad concussion for like a long time after that. I ended up getting a second. I whacked my noodle at a Christmas party like 2 weeks after that, and had black eyes and almost broke my nose, and just really bad. So when you're talking about dark night of the soul, yeah, we're getting there. And I just remember like, having a headache. I was taking like 8 or, I'd say 6 to 8 aspirin a day. And like people saying I wasn't really finishing sentences. The thing is that you're really not supposed to drink when you have a really bad concussion, which, I continue to. I get like 1 beer, Sherry, and I'd just be like zombie land. But yet I continued to try and do it. So it's probably a good 3-4 months that I was just like that. You know what I mean? So finally I was just like, I need help here. And yeah, so I put my hand up and I said to my boss, and my boss is like this ultimate like alpha male, hunter into MMA. I'm like, this guy's gonna think I'm such a flake. He's gonna fire me. And then my parents are gonna disown me, and all my friends are gonna think I'm lame because I can't drink anymore. And guess what happened? The exact opposite of all of that. Darren, my boss, shout out to him, gave me so discreet and private about it, helped me navigate it. My mom flew out and like a moment's notice to help me navigate all the paperwork and such, because of course there was, to make sure that I was still getting some degree of wage compensation while I had a leave of absence. And I was not in the mindset to be able to navigate that myself. So she hopped on a plane. I got all the support that I just wasn't really expecting or didn't think I deserved, I think, more than anything. And so that's a lesson to anybody that's listening that's kind of on the fence of, or like having these stories come up like, oh, but this is going to happen. What about this? It's generally going to be the opposite of what you think, in the way that you're going to get the help that you need. So, and I got the first night that I went to a program, like a help group, was the thing that changed my life. Really, it truly was that connection with like-minded people, and realizing I did a lot of drinking by myself. I would to save face, I would have a couple beers at a house party to make sure that nobody would clue in how much I was drinking. And then when I got home, I'm like, perfect, and I slammed 10 beer, right? So I did a lot of it in hiding, and as a result, I thought my condition was very much my own and like unique to me, and I felt this really detached sense of self and just with people around me. And that first night with that first group that I'd gone to changed everything for me. It was literally, I had this like profound like spiritual intervention, like 180. I started crying as soon as the guy started talking, not like weeping, but like I teared up, and like I could feel weight come off my shoulders, and I was like, holy crap. So three plus years of sobriety, where I got into like Wayne Dyer and Eckhart Tolle, and really did some massive healing. I had this, like, I swear, like I've never felt it quite since. There was like some kind of guide with me that was like my intuition. I was really a changed person, and I haven't quite found or experienced that since then. And so 3.5 years of that, and it was at my drummer's wedding, was my weddings, and what is it, that's tippy top, I think, for triggering for
Yeah,
people.
what is it? Weddings,
Weddings,
funerals.
funerals. Imagine like moving is people hate moving. Beer and pizza seems to be, anyways. Yeah. So wedding, and I was a groomsman, and there was just like drinks coming. It was a great wedding. And I was super like unprotective. I was still like secretive about who I wasn't drinking. It was like 200 people. So I didn't want to be like every time, I don't drink. Where now, of course, I would handle it completely differently. I would be like, yes, I'm good. I don't drink. Be confident about it. But I still wasn't very confident about it. And I was still, some people bringing shots, and I was doing the, toss it over my shoulder into the plant, tequila shots. And this, again, nonsense, right? Like just playing with fire. And then by the end of the night, I made it so close. And I ended up having a shot of tequila, and like the brain chemistry stuff happened. And I was so shocked how quickly I said, all the voices, like these dormant voices, just came alive, and, there was like part of me that was like, I got this, which was my ego saying like, I got this, like I can do this now, I'm cured, right? And then there was another one that was going, holy hell, like that got right back on top of you, like, can you feel that? And I was like, yeah. And I kind of missed that. I had this like real angel devil conversation going on. Of course, the devil, won that night. And as I'm driving home from the wedding at 2 a.m., I'm like looking for all the liquor stores that might still be open. And then that other voice is like, what happened to you, man? Like 3.5 years, look at you, you're back. It's old Matt again. I was like, yeah, I kind of feel good about this, very confusing state. And, so the next 3.5 years I spent trying to find some moderation formula that worked. And I'll tell you, 0% success rate. And I tried everything. We don't need to go into it. I'm some of for humor, I guess. I'll use like, I only drink, I'll keep all the alcohol out in the garage. All of a sudden I'm like hanging out in the garage all the time. You know what I mean? What? I only drink when I go out. All of a sudden I'm going out every night of the week. I'm like, okay, that didn't work either. Now, like, it's so much more expensive this way too. And I was like, okay, only weekends, like, the 5 on 2 off thing. Before you know it, it's like the first long weekend, and then the next weekend, which is not a long weekend, all of a sudden that's a long weekend. And then before you know it, like every weekend is 5 days and I'm binge drinking. I'm like, what? Why can't I do this? I don't understand. And then finally it was like, my dad passed away a couple of days before Christmas 2018, and he'd been a heavy drinker from the time pretty much mirrored me, like 15 onwards. And he'd retired for the 1 year there, and he started smoking cigarettes again. And I just believe he just wasn't taking care of himself, right? And
Same thing happened with my dad. He retired a couple years. And same thing, heavy drinking. I mean, he ended up having a heart attack, but he was just so unhealthy, right? Because I think we just kind of give up, and it happens in these slow degrees, right? Like, oh, we'll just, this will just be this one. I'll just have this. I'll let myself just drink today, right? And you mentioned this earlier. I'll just drink myself drink today, or I'll start my diet tomorrow, or I'll do this tomorrow, and then next thing you know, right, you're 65, you can't walk anymore, and it's so hard to get yourself to a place of health at that point.
It is, yeah. And he was a big golfer, and by that time he started like treating himself to. He'd always walked, right? That's how he was getting his steps in. So he started treating himself to a golf cart. So now all of a sudden he's not walking. You know what I mean? He's like, it's kind of like this. This idea that retirement's just like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So with him, and I know it because like I'm his son, right? I know what his kind of mindset was, and some of this is speculation, but I think it's. I've earned this, and a big part of his identity is gone. He was a fireman for 35 years. He's a hero. And all of a sudden he's not that, he's a retired fireman. You know what I mean? So I think a lot of that just hit him. And like you say, he wasn't taking care of himself under the guise that like he's earned, this time that he can smoke cigarettes again, have a few extra drinks after the golf game's over. He's earned the right to like use a golf cart. So all these decisions, this, confluence of events essentially. And he passed away, and that was like on my way out to his celebration of life, which was a few months later, April 2019. So Prince George is 8 hours west of Edmonton, right on the same longitude, I guess, east to west. And right in smack dab in the middle of it's the Canadian Rockies, just beautiful. It's like literally to the kilometer, called Jasper. It's this tiny little like time capsule, really cute mountain town. And we'd had some moments there, of course, because again, the halfway point. So we meet there, and my dad and I. And it was a beautiful sunny day, but I was coming out of this day where I was like, I'd been up all night doing cocaine and drinking and smoking cigarettes myself, right? So I was super strung out, and I'm heading out to my dad's celebration of life, and I'm going, just felt empty. I'm driving through one of my favorite places on earth. It's a beautiful sunny day. I am going to pay respects to my dad, and I felt like black, like dark, heavy energy, like a complete failure, scared, anxious, just what is going on. So I took out my phone and just started trying to capture some of that, just get some of that energy moving, right? And this is the closest thing I had to that other story I was telling you about when I went to the first group meeting that I went to. And something happened there, and I had this like, it wasn't quite as profound, but there was definitely something that, I said something a certain way, and just verbalizing it outside, I got tapped somehow spiritually. I mean, and that's where I decided, the rest of the drive, which is 8 hours, so 4 hours on the back end, 4 hours of just kind of complete hell. And then the next 4 hours was like building myself back up. Like, hey, I'm going to do this for dad. I'm going to do this for that whole lineage. My dad's whole side of the family have been heavy drinkers. Will stop with me. I'm going to do it as a tribute to him, tribute to myself. I've done this before, really like solutions based, inner dialogue with myself. And I was a completely different person by the time I got to Prince George. I had a wicked time with my brother. We hadn't been back home together in like 20 years by that point. So it's kind of like this Wes Anderson movie type scenario where we're going through all like our, all the different like haunts that we'd had, and this really nostalgic. So I think it was just one of those things where like a perfect storm of all these things happened that propelled me forward into my now 4+ years of alcohol free. And it's really cool. So, and then we can pause here because this is obviously what's going to segue into my career pivot and what I'm doing now. But just if there's any topics you wanted to circle back to.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. Often the only way that we are willing to change is through getting into enough pain. Yeah. And everybody has a different threshold for that, right? And I talked to some people who, they had a really bad day at work, and they were crying on the bathroom floor, and that was enough for them to change their lives. And then there's people who have to go through, I've had other guests on the podcast who are like, yeah, I was in jail twice. My parents died. I tried to commit suicide by cop. And then that was the only way that they were actually able to change. And I always find it so fascinating. But there is always this like pivotal moment where we really just decide like
Yeah.
no more. And I always find that there's some sort of, this is going to sound corny, but I can't think of another way to say it, like divine intervention that happens, right? There's this moment of clarity that we often feel like is somehow outside of ourselves, and that we have somehow been reorganized outside of even our own efforts. And it's then, what do we do with that on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah.
And how do we then make the change? And then for many of my guests, and I know including you, and you'll get to this in a minute, it is the spark that leads us to a life of service. That is how we continue to change our own lives and then the lives of others as well. So walk us through how that went.
Beautiful setup. That was awesome. Great summary and then beautiful setup. Thanks. That's great. You've done this before. So yeah, definitely. So 2019, as I mentioned, that was my first, from April on, sober. And I noticed there was something, as soon as I removed the alcohol from my system, big surprise, I started finding these like emotions coming up, and I didn't really know what they were. I would just allow them and get curious about them. Like I get emotional when I'd watch specifically like comeback stories or like people that bet on themselves. You know what I mean? Those types of stories would make me emotional, like tearing up kind of thing, right? And I was like, okay, there's something to this, right?
And I think so. I want to just interrupt you for a second.
Yeah.
I love you just said something that I think is really important that I want our listeners to hear again is you start feeling these emotions, and what has frequently happened for many of us, whether we're addicted to, shopping, drugs, alcohol, sex, whatever we use to kind of zone out on life, once we've made this decision to not do that, now we start feeling feelings. And I love what you said about not just feeling them, but being curious about them. Because I think it can be so disarming for people who have opted out of feeling for a while. And that's, what so many of us do, because life can be overwhelming. And when we say, okay, I'm going to go back to being okay with feeling, it can be overwhelming. But the best way to deal with that is with this mood of curiosity of, what is that? What's going on with me right now? Like, what is this? Why do I feel this way, right? Why am I thinking that this is truth, whatever it is, and having curiosity about it instead of judging it or running from it? And so I just love how you said that. So keep going.
Yeah. Curiosity is one of my favorite words. And just even the word, like saying it gives me that kind of goosebumpy feeling, right? I just love it. Right. So yeah, that was definitely it. And it was like, okay, instead of numbing these feelings out, they're coming up and I'm like journaling about them. You know what I mean? I had enough sort of foundation that I built from that previous sobriety stint. And so I just started developing some really good habits. Yeah. And then, I turned fast forward a couple of years from there. So that was just sort of like this foreshadowing, right? My intuition is like, I wouldn't say going nuts, but it's like beyond. I find now intuition can be very subtle, and I have to find it in like a silent spot for meditation. But this one was like, hey, like you haven't been paying attention to me in a while, and you've been numbing me, and like we got some stuff to talk about, you know what I mean? So 2 years,
and we have stuff to do. We got stuff to do in this world, and you need to get on board. Like I am sitting in the car, the car's running. You just have to get in it.
Yes, I'm like waiting for you, Yeah. I'm on the porch going, should I get in the car? So it's like 2 years after that of just feeling this gradual sort of discontent with my career, and I was finding that I was justifying it the same way that, you justify a relationship you shouldn't be in, or I was justifying even alcohol, again, a relationship I shouldn't have been in, as far as like, but I got 6 weeks paid vacation. Like I'm at 6 figures here pretty quick. Been doing this all my life, and justifying it, right? I'm like, okay, that's kind of a red flag there too, right? The other red flag, the main one for me, Sherry, was when I would say to myself, all I have to do is do this for another 15 years, my body would like contract and I'd feel like lightheaded and I'd feel anxious and dread. I'm like, whoa, okay, interesting. So that's how it
And
was.
back to that idea of curiosity, right? Because I think you feel our bodies are antennas to our intuition, right? Or our
Yeah.
source, or however you want to look at it.
Yep.
But feeling that in our bodies and being willing to listen to it and be
Mhm.
curious about it as well,
Yes.
right? Not just the craziness in your head, but your body too.
It was the
And that's
body.
such an
Yeah.
important indicator. But so often we're like, meh,
Yeah.
I'm good.
Yeah. I'll go like watch a movie now and just we'll turn that feeling off. So yeah, it was that's when I ended up acting on that feeling in my body. So I took a 6 month sabbatical. I'd never taken more than, a week or two off for that whole, whatever, 20 plus years. Right. So I'm like, oh, I know people don't do this more often. So I saved enough money. I got a bonus from work that sort of more or less funded me for 6 months to take off. And it was initially just to like reset, and then go back and do my 15 years, right? And the morning one of my sabbatical, I woke up and I had a voice in my head as clear as day that I swear is not mine. It was like, I view it as like my gramps or like a guide of some kind. I always think it's my gramps on my mom's side because they've had a great connection with him. And the voice said, "You're not going back." And I was like, interesting. Who said that? And why, how am I not going back? And so that was like, that. Yeah, from there, I remember I walked out into a campsite that hadn't opened yet. And I love campsites, and it was out in nature, and it was April. So there's still a bit of snow up here and such, and just like walked around, and I got all these like ideas of just stuff I wanted to try and do. And it was crazy. I hadn't felt that like creative flow in so long. And anyway, so just the next 6 months was really just trying different things. So trying all these different things. I wouldn't say get rich quick schemes, but like, just the side of it. When I'd see something come up on YouTube about like, hey, have you ever tried drop shipping? I'm like, no, what's that? I dabble in a lot of things, right? Just to
You
see.
use the YouTube algorithm as a sign from the universe.
Exactly. Exactly. Now looking back on it, of course, there's a lot of I know you talk about it on your show, the failures, quote unquote, which to me it's learning is what it is,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
When you detach emotion and judgment from failure, it's simply learning, isn't it? So, which is incredibly important. So, I was trying my best to do, whatever I could, so I didn't have to go back to work. It wasn't like get rich quick, but I just wanted to be able to do something that I didn't have to go back to work. And I had this like pressure I was putting on myself, right? And 6 months to completely change your life is not exactly, what I mean, realistic. So I did go back to work. I'm skipping over a little bit. By this time, I had done the whole idea of, okay, what am I good at in one column? What am I passionate about in the other column? And I recognized that I really liked, from my just vast experience that I'd had, 22 years of experience, the last 12 years, I had been doing a lot of coaching and mentoring, specifically the last 6, because of being an assistant store manager. That was essentially what I was. I was the point person. I was a resource. I was there to help support people, and bring up the next crop of talent, so to speak, right? So I really liked that aspect of it. And I knew I was going to miss it. So I'm like, okay, well, how can I fit that in with, my personal story? And I was still a little bit like hesitant about coming out with my recovery story because I knew I was going to be going back to work. And that's one of the reasons I protected, is because I didn't really want, the whole gossipy side of it. Now, knowing what I know, it's not as big a deal as I thought, but I was so plugged into that culture that I'm like, okay, I can't have these people know, and they're not going to think of me as a leader if they know that I've been like this drunk for 10 years, So all this to say that I pulled back on that for the time being. And I had this overlap period of about 4 months where I was doing my old job with getting my coaching business up and running. And I figured that I could do that for a couple of years. And, a couple months into that, I was like, this is not working. It's like this new me that's ready to get, like, I'm giving birth to this like new version of me. And there's like this old energy, this old story, and that they're just clashing big time. Right. So
And
it was,
once you get a taste of that
oh,
authenticity,
it's,
like you
you
can't
can't
go
go back.
back,
You can't
right?
go
Like
back.
it's
Yeah.
just, you just start rolling downhill. I mean, that's so much of my story and like my
Yeah.
demise, well, for me, going through that process was what led to my addiction. That's a whole other story and a whole other
Right.
podcast. But
Yeah.
yeah, I felt like that. Like once I started really listening and seeing who I was meant to be, you can't stop it, right? It's
That's
just,
right.
it's the boulder going down, but it's the snowball going down the hill.
Snowball.
It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
100%. Right. And, so by this time I'd done a couple of coaching certifications, And it was on my grad call of my level 2 in Lifted, which is the main performance coach, like life coach certification I've gotten. Amazing. Enlifted.me is the site, little plug for them. Amazing stuff. And, Mark England, who's my main mentor there, the head coach there, is just such an incredible, presenter. And so it's the grad call. It's January of 2020. Am I getting? Yeah, 2022. So last January, like 18 months ago, 18 months ago. And so right at the end of it, and it was just such a powerful, profound ending to the grad call. I just, and then he's really good about just like being abrupt and like hanging up instead of like letting okay, how's everybody feeling? He just said what he had to say and everybody's tearing up and emotional and boom. And I just stared at my computer screen for like 2 minutes feeling this emotion. And then I said, that's it. I'm quitting tomorrow. I typed up my letter of resignation. Like I felt like just, this is it, and then of course, I slept on it and then realized, no, well, I got to like refinance my house first because like, as of 2 weeks from now, the bank's not going to, you know what I mean? They're like, you quit your job. We're not going to let you refinance. So we did a few things to kind of get, the financial part in order. And a few other little things, but I gave my 2 weeks, and then haven't really looked back since then. So February 1st of 2022, I dove in to the deep end, so to speak. And, again, more of these, like, not really sure how I'm going to do it. It's sort of like I just posted this quote. I heard it the other day. I posted on my Instagram. It's like, it's something along the lines of, to paraphrase it, is when you have your why, the how takes care of itself. Worded a little bit differently. So, and easier said than done sometimes, right? I'm sure you can relate, like that first, 6 months, even longer than that, perhaps. I was a lot of flailing around, a lot of like not really sure what my identity is. I remember when people ask me what I'm doing now, I'd be like, well, I'm like doing this like coaching thing, like, but I was working at, you know what I mean? This lengthy, shapeless explanation where I'm trying to convince myself that I'm a coach as well. So the identity part wasn't there yet, and wasn't for, like, I'm going to be honest, for a while. And that's totally fine and totally part of the process, right? I didn't even really know my niche. Initially, I knew I was going to go into the recovery somewhere deep down inside. I knew that was my path, right? But initially, I'm like, no, I want to help everybody, like Tony Robbins, like the life coach, right? And then realizing after I went through a business mentoring program, it's like, no, you got to set up your lemonade stand on your street corner, and then eventually maybe you can start expanding out. But like, you got to find you find your lane first, or your niche, business talk, which totally made sense. So that's, to kind of button this all up together, that's where I decided to, come out with my recovery story, because it is cool. I know how powerful hearing other people's recovery story was for me. You know what I mean? So I'm like, well, now that I'm like out of that old job and I don't really have to worry about the gossipy, whatever, the political kind of stuff that could happen from that, I can just be me now. And so that's when I decided. And it's like, to me, it was a no-brainer, like just my life experience that I can speak to, until I'm blue in the face because I've lived it for my entire adult life, that being my recovery and my, addictions and working through them. And then the coaching, which I have this vast body of work from my previous career, and just sort of marrying them. And, here we are now.
That's awesome. And it's such an example of a story that I've been trying to tell in this podcast, right? Is this idea of having a dark night of the soul, changing your own life, learning learning to live in your own skin, and then using that as a way to be of service to other people.
Definitely. Yeah. I love the, and I like saying this part about the story, or like I guess my perspective of why I'm doing this or how I'm doing this is like the whole hero's journey, right? So, and one of the elements of the hero's journey is the dark night of the soul, right? So like the Joseph Campbell, like the storytelling aspect, and, I'll do like the easiest, like the Cole's Notes version. There's like the 3 phases. So there's like the call to action, or the threshold, right? Where that's kind of part of it, where it's like, you realize there's no going back, like what we talk about. After you cross that threshold, there's something missing, or there's something not quite right about your life, or I knew there's something not quite right about my life. And then as soon as I crossed that threshold, and this works twofold for the drinking and for the career change, there was no going back, which touched on, earlier in the interview. And then there's the second part where it's just like, okay, it's the self-development, the expansion, the growth, which there is that like shadow side of it, the dark night of the soul, that I've otherwise been trying to like turn down, avoid, escape. right? And this time I'm going in with the curiosity, right? And realizing, okay, this is okay. This is not as afraid, I'm not as afraid as I thought I was going to be. The anxiety was actually coming from not doing this earlier. You know what I mean? These like aha moments that I had. And then after coming out of the dark night of the soul is like act 3, which is the service aspect, right? So what have I learned? And I think it's human nature to, once you've discovered something, even from a kid, you get a toy, you want to share it with people, I want to show my friends now, right? So I think there's like that element of it. There definitely was for me, where I was like, nice, like I did this, I'm happy. Now I want to show people, because I remember how crappy that felt. I want to show people, that there is a way. And I've done it. What I really like, Sherry, nowadays is how like nuanced and how like customizable like recovery is, right? There isn't just one black and white way to do it. And, we talk about, there's programs out there, and if that works for you, wonderful. But I'm finding I still have one foot in that side of things, but the other foot is so much more into like meditation, breath work, the exercise, getting movement, getting outside for your breaks, all these other types of things that are just good life practices that just really enhanced and made my recovery and sobriety so much more sustainable. So just adding all of that together, and then nuanced depends on the person's personality and needs. It's almost like, to me, I look at it as like personal trainer with the nutrition is so dialed into that person because that person is different. I view that as like there's an opportunity to do that with like recovery and sobriety coaching as well, right? Where it doesn't necessarily have to be as black and white. I mean, granted, for sure, that initial triage period, let's get the beer out of your hand, right? That we should, but even then, like there has been some flexibility with that, right? The whole sober curious thing, the harm reduction. There's there's so many different topics we could go into about it, but that's my view of it. And that's why I really like it, is just sharing what's worked for me. And there's so many, different like modalities of recovery and habits and different things that I've personally gone through that I'm just so eager to share with everyone.
Yeah, and I think that's very much my story as well. So I'm 7 years sober, so probably right around the time you first got sober.
Yeah.
But over time, I need other modalities of healing beyond sort of, the group program that initially got me sober. Because when you're first sober, you're like, just tell me what to do. Like,
100%.
I just need the program, right? It's like when you're
Mhm.
first trying to, I don't know, maybe lose weight, right? You're like, just tell me what I can put in my mouth and tell me how much I have to walk every day. Like,
Totally.
I just need very simple and clear steps. And they're great programs for that. And then but once you're still doing those steps, there's more modalities that can enhance that even more, right? There's there's the deeper trauma therapy and, working through your own trauma and just figuring out what do you want your life to look like? Because
Totally.
for many people who have gone through this and come to the other side, we find that the best way for us to really embody being sober and having a sober lifestyle is being of service to other people. But what does that mean, right? You talked about it so well, but I've gone through it too. I mean, I was a year and a half sober. I had the luxury of being able to take off my first really year and a half. I was still had a business going, but I didn't have a lot going on to the point where, and I didn't try to grow the business. I just kind of kept going along with the business that I already had. But I really got to a place where I knew I needed to figure out what was next for me. And I sought a life coach, and I saw a life coach for about 6 months and, made some decisions. I went back to the corporate world for 3 years.
Right.
And then had this inner calling, kind of the same as you, like I'm supposed to be teaching some of these principles that I'm using in my life to other people, but do it from the perspective of business, right? Marrying the woo-woo spiritual side with the business side and the marketing side of things. But I had to go through a long process of, I hired another life coach and said, and she was a life/business coach, very similar to me. It was like, what do I I think I'm hearing this calling. What does that look like? Right? How do I actually make, what do I offer? And then it's going through the process of then figuring out what that looks like. Right. And it changes
Totally.
over time. I mean,
Sure
I'm
does.
2.5 years into this, and it's evolving and changing. And the layers of the onion keep unfolding,
Mhm.
both in my life spiritually and in the business. And I think that's such a beautiful process.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, very well put, and that's what the podcast I do, Beyond Recovery, is very much speaks to that. Okay, it's like, because I've worked with clients that are like, they get the 1 year mark and it's kind of like almost anticlimactic. It's like, okay, now what? You know what I mean? Well, the rest of your life is now what? You got through that first calendar year, you went through your birthday, Thanksgiving, Christmas, your dad's birthday, mom's birthday, whatever it may be. You've gone through that first full year, and it's like, okay, now what? And that's like really getting into that. And that's what you're saying. It's like, and it's for us, folks that have been so used to having addictions or whatnot. It's like, what are you going to do with that space now? There's like, for me, I know there's so much energy I used, like, lying or getting over on people to maintain my addiction. I'm like, if I'm putting that energy somewhere else, oh man, I wonder what I'm going to be capable of doing. But having said that, the law of conservation of energy, that energy is, it's going somewhere. So that's where, you talk about, yeah, just finding some better habits. And some people, yeah, they get to that stage where like, I don't, I've been talking to other folks right now that are like, 3-4 months in, and like, they feel very complacent because like their energy has just been going into like staying sober. And to me, that's like exactly like, to your point, that's when the life coaching aspect comes in. Okay, well, what did you used to like before drinking? What's like a 10 to you? What's been on the periphery of your, your mind or your goals, but you're just, alcohol's gotten in the way or life has gotten in the way. Let's talk about that stuff, right? And see where that leads you. And so, yeah, really cool. Thanks for sharing your part of it. But yeah, absolutely. I think that's where like the life coaching aspect, or sober life coaching, we'll call it, really comes in. And even like that business coaching too. It's like, and that's why I like your niche of like working with people in recovery that are also like entrepreneurs, because there's, yeah, like we know how to, somebody told me, it's an interesting quote. Being an entrepreneur is like the ultimate self-development, because you go through all the like self-doubt, you know what I mean? The imposter syndrome, all that is just like boom, wrapped up, and it comes at you like pretty much daily. Let's face it. It just gets turned down the further on you get. But so I thought that was pretty interesting too. So to have that element of it as well. And like I can speak for myself anyways, there's some like self-worth issues. I have now realized that like my new numbing agent is like keeping myself busy, so I have to rein myself in with that. So like when I start feeling like lonely, or some of these feelings that I used to drink away, I now pick up my phone. Oh, let's check Instagram, right? I just caught this in the last year, that like I have this like collapsed distinction of like achievement and self-worth, and I'm like prying them apart and realizing, so that is a learning, like it's such arrested development. Like I've never viewed myself like that. You know what I mean? Like it's just, yeah. So for me, there needs to be some guidance there. And so I still work with coaches. It's funny that coaches always work with coaches, right? Which is good. It's good, good and healthy. And then it shows like we're walking the walk, talking the talk. So yeah, I definitely been using coaches this whole time as well. Perhaps rambling at this point, but yeah, those are my
Yeah.
my takes on basically what the conversation we're having.
Yeah. And I find that there's nothing that's going to bring out your crazy like being an entrepreneur.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's just, and it's not necessarily being an entrepreneur. I'm going to add a little bit to that. There's nothing that will bring out your crazy like being an entrepreneur who is the face of your brand, right?
Sure.
You are the face. You are the one that people are coming. You're what people are buying, right? So this is
Right.
our coaches. I mean, even realtors, doctors, hairdressers, right? You are the one that they are coming to see. And that means that you have to have a certain level of self-worth if you're going to stand up and be like, you need to buy from me. And it brings up all this stuff. And that's,
Point.
it's been interesting for me in my business. I started with this idea of like, okay, because I've done all the self-work, not all of it, but I've done a lot of self-work. I was like, okay, people just need to know what they need to do, and then they're good. But what I've realized after a couple years of doing this is there's so much more to that. There's so much more to the spiritual, emotional, development that happens when we are the face of our brand that really needs to be worked through in conjunction with doing the things, right? Because we're going to continue to have these things come up every day. Like, I feel like a total dork and like no one likes me. I've always felt like that from the moment I was born. I don't know. I've always just felt like I didn't fit in.
Yeah.
I can make myself look like I fit in, but I just inside, I always feel like that. And it manifests all the time in my business. It manifests as laziness. Oh, I'm too busy. I have to do something else before I do my marketing, right? Or, oh, well, I can't do that program, even though it's on my heart because no one's going to buy it. Right. Or no one's going to, oh, I can't go to that networking meeting because I'm going to get there and no one's going to want to talk to me. Right. I find all these excuses to not really embody what I want to embody in my business. And it's all just fear. And so you have to work through both of those things at the same time. And that is one of the things that I'm working on in my coaching business. One of the reasons why I started this podcast, because I want us to talk about, as business leaders, the fact that it's not just doing the things, it's also doing the internal work.
Yeah, that's a great point. A great point. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Like putting yourself out there. And I know what you mean. There's like, I've gone through, like, I'd say even the last week, just my posts, I haven't had I'm not sure what the word is. There's a hesitation to do like the reels. So I've just been doing like, the quotes and like the text style posts, which is totally fine. I'm putting content out. But there's part of me, I've just had a little bit of an energetic low, right? So I'm not getting out there and be like, hey, doing the whole, reels thing with the face to camera. And that's, I'm fine with that. But there, even 6 months ago, I would have been getting on myself like, no, you gotta be, blah, blah, blah. So yeah, that is definitely a tricky part to navigate, and like the nuance you speak of for sure. Yeah, that's yeah. And it's ongoing, right? It's yeah, that's very good points. Very good points by you.
Well, yeah. And I think going back to this idea of being curious is like, well, why don't I want to do any reels? Like, what's really going on with me? Is this, I need some self-care and I just need a little bit of a break?
Yeah.
Or is this that I'm afraid of something? Am I not doing it because I'm afraid that somehow, whatever, my voice isn't good enough, or I'm overstaying my welcome, or, whatever any of those things could be? Or do I just genuinely need to not see myself on camera anymore because I'm getting too self-conscious or whatever it is?
Right.
And having that discernment of, is this fear or is this self-care?
Yeah.
And that's a real hard thing for people to really understand when they're the face.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And I think there is, like, for me, just coming up from us talking about this, there is some other self-judgment, or I have that like boss that I was so used to being, conditioned, like the work with urgency and pressure and fear, right? So there, I have taken that on in myself. Again, I'm aware of that now, and I'm a lot easier on myself in a lot of ways, or at least I'm a lot more aware, I should say. But yeah, there's definitely some of that, like, whoa, like, why aren't you doing it? You're supposed to be, you know what I mean? You're supposed to be, or you should be, those two words that I just love, should and supposed to, which are always external conditioning of some form, right? That's showing up in my inner dialogue. Yeah, interesting stuff. That is, the whole, me being my own boss, I take that very seriously. Apparently I have an inner boss that, is definitely the guy with his arms crossed, that may be my dad, maybe a manifestation of some of the other bosses I've had throughout my 22 years of my previous job. So yeah, there's definitely that, inside me, still. So
yeah, well, all our little demons come out all the time, and we just have to be curious about them and say,
that's right.
Okay, what are you trying to teach me? Or, hey, I really appreciate that you're trying to protect me right now, right? Because all our fears are just trying to protect us.
Yes.
But I'm okay. I'm okay. I got this.
Definitely.
Thank you. Not today, Satan. Thank you. I'm going to move on.
Yeah.
You get in the back seat. I'm driving.
I'm a driving. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. 100%. Love it.
Thank you so much. This was so fun. I feel like I could talk to you all day long, but
Absolutely.
If anybody wants to find you, where can they find you?
Yeah. So thanks for having me on. I totally agree. Feels like we could have segued off into about 3 or 4 different parts, have like a mini series, you and I, eh? Yeah, so recoveryroadmap.me, that's my Instagram handle, and as well as my website. And I have Matt Gardiner Live is my YouTube channel, and also my Facebook. So recoveryroadmap.me and Matt Gardiner Live.
Excellent. And look for the podcast that we were on together when I was a guest
Yes.
on Matt's Beyond Recovery podcast. I'll put it in the show notes, but you can probably Google for it and find it as well. And it was such a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your journey and your wisdom, and we appreciate you. Mwah.
Oh, thanks so much, Sherry. Really appreciate it. And anytime you need me back on, I absolutely adore talking with you. So thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you for listening to Bosses with Baggage. We are honored that you chose to spend your precious time with us. I hope that you are feeling inspired to reframe your setbacks into your superpowers so that you can change not only your life, but the life of everyone around you. If you enjoyed today's podcast, and I sure hope you did, please subscribe, rate, and share on your favorite podcast listener. And if you have any ideas for a future guest, or you need some help growing your business, I'd love to connect with you. You can find me directly on my website, which is sherrysutton.com, SherrySutton.com. We'll see you next time.